Next.js has quickly become my favorite framework for building web applications. In this video, we're going to do a Next.js crash course integrating with Faunadb as our database, using React Form Hook as our library to handle our forms, using Tailwind CSS for our styling, and then lastly, using SWR to query our data and keep our cache up to date. So let's go ahead and dive on in. All right, so like I said, this is a Next.js crash course. We're gonna have some starter code for you to start with. I'll show you that in a second to get some of the configurations and things just kind of there. That way we can really focus on the most important parts and kind of build those through. So I do wanna start off by saying that this video is sponsored by Fauna DB, but I've used Fauna in the past and I've really enjoyed using it myself. You'll see how quick and easy it is to set up a database and then to connect with it, and it makes a really nice partner with Next.js because Fauna is optimized for the Jamstack. It's API first, so you're really going to have a pretty performant and capable database. Now, we're not going to get into all the different things and optimizations that can come with Fauna, but just know there are a ton, and it's definitely worth checking out, and you should definitely check it out or try it out in this crash course. So just a quick look at what we're going to build here. Just an idea for a snippet repository. So you can create snippets and then be able to search or look through snippets that other people have created. So I'm going to copy in one. Let's create a new snippet in here, and I'll just call this like Next.js router. We'll see this in a second. This is going to be language, just JavaScript, HTML, CSS. We can make this have more options if we wanted to, but that's it for now. And this is going to be use router hook in Next.js. And then you just paste in the code here, get rid of the leading space, and then save. And that should save it into Faunadb. That should then reload the home page and show you that you've got it here, Next.js router. We could then update it. So we've got update capability. So here's Next.js router updated. Save that. And then you could also delete this, as you'd probably expect. The last thing is this cool little kind of drop down to show you the code here. I thought this was fun. And then you can also copy. So it's got a copy button. Now, a lot of that kind of layout stuff is taken care of for us in the starter code. And then we'll go around and fill in the gaps. So thinking about that starter code, what you're going to want to do, I'll have a link to this and link to this repository below. It's the Next.js crash course, Fauna SWR, React Hook Form, Tailwind library. And inside of here, there is a part 1 starter branch. So you'll want to check out that branch, and that's what we're going to start with. That's what we're going to do right now. So let's go and actually look at that code. So if I run this one, first, you'll need to check out that branch and then npm install all of your packages. So this stuff has the packages already set up that we'll need for Faunadb, the JavaScript client, React Form, React Hook Form, and then SWR for our querying and our caching as well. Now it's also set up with Tailwind. So we've got the Tailwind configuration in here, as well as our post-CSS config to apply Tailwind in post-CSS. So let's go ahead and start this up with npm run dev is how you start this. And then it's going to be available at localhost 3000. So let's go back to that locally running application and let's refresh. And once this is up and running, you'll see we have some of that base stuff already laid out. So we'll have a little bit of our styling. You can see there's no snippets because this isn't connected to a Faunadb database yet. There is the snippet form. We could save, it's not going to do anything. We could cancel, that sort of stuff. So that stuff is really good to go. Let's take a quick look at what all is in this inside of our components. We have one for doing the code, for displaying that code with the dropdown as well as the copy button. We've got a form that we'll fill out in a second. We've got a snippet to display the snippet and give us functionality for edit and delete. Then inside of pages, we've got really 2 pages that we care about. The home page, which is where we display all of the pages, and then a new page. And that's where we are going to create new items, and then as well as an edit. And this thing is going to take in an ID. We'll talk about that more in a second to know which one we're trying to edit. And then lastly, inside of our API, we've got our CRUD route. So create, read, which is just snippets here, and then update and delete. So those are our 4 CRUD routes inside of our APIs. So hopefully you've got a little bit of experience to kind of understand what these files are with Next.js. And so at this point, we'll go ahead and move on over to Faunadb. Now this part is, I think, really, really cool. You sign up I've got a link below that you can sign up with, but a free account with Faunadb. So you sign up for free, and then you get a nice little dashboard here. This is hosted for you, so you don't have to worry about like deploying and hosting your own database. And click on new database here, and I'll call this the Next.js crash course. You can start with some dummy data here if you want. We're not going to, so we'll just do this empty. And I just want to mention again, FaunaDB is kind of API first. So it's really optimized for the Jamstack and for serverless functions, because inside of Nextjs with our API routes, we're not going to be able to maintain database connections. We're not going to be able to maintain those because these are serverless functions. They go up and down. So FaunaDB is really optimized for that and really is made for that by being API first. And that's how we're going to interact with it here in a second. So once we have our database, we need to do two things. We need to create a key that we'll use, and then we'll need to create a new collection. So it doesn't really matter which one we do. We can start with a new collection here, and we can call this Snippets. That's what we're going to reference it by. And we can kind of leave the defaults and just go ahead and create this. So there's no documents in there now, but just know we could go in and create a document if we wanted to, which we will probably do here in a second, and create a document. And this is basically going to just look like a JSON doc. So we could add a bit of JSON. Actually, why don't we go ahead and do this? So inside of here, we're going to have a few things. We'll have name, and the name of this first one will be a try catch, for example. Or actually, let's just do a console log, and then we'll have a description, logs out hello world. We'll have a language, which will be JavaScript in this case. And then lastly, we'll have the code. And in this, it'll be console log. And then inside of here, we'll need some single quotes, since we're using double quotes on the outside of hello world. So now we save this, and that should be our first document that's created. So if we come back and look in our collections and then look in our documents, you can see the document and you can expand it. And one of the things that's important is to have or to see how these things are laid out. So each individual document has a ref, which inside of it has an ID. Then it's got a timestamp, and then it's got the stuff that we care most about, which is the data. So data is going to be an object, and inside of there, we'll have our name, description, language, and code properties. So those are the things that we care about. We've got our collection created. We've got a sample item created. Now let's go into security, and we need to create a secret key for us to use. Now, we want this to be a server key. This is basically us, like in our API routes, is basically a server for Nextjs. So this will be a server key. And we could give this thing a name if we wanted to, Nextjs crash course key. And this is obviously, well, hopefully, obviously secret. So you don't want to share this with other people. So I'm going to show you mine. I'm going to delete this when I'm done, because I've got another one set up for me actually testing. But what you want to do is take this key, so copy and paste that, and then move back over to your source code, and there is a .env.local.example file. So what you want to do is you want to copy that, so copy that file, and then paste it, and then rename this to be .env.local. So Nextjs is able to look inside of .env.local automatically for environment variables and pull them into your application. So let me copy this thing again. Let's copy that, and then let's paste it in. So yours should look just like this, except it should be your own secret key. Whatever that thing is, you want to paste that thing right in there. So we save that, and we don't have to touch it again. Nothing really changes in the application yet. It's still going to not really do a whole lot. So this is where we'll start to get into actually adding the integration with FaunaDB. So for this, let's start by opening our Fauna utils, or our Fauna file inside of utils. So this is something that I like to do, is have a utils directory, and then any sort of files that interact with some third-party client of some sort. In this case, Fauna, want to have a file specifically for Fauna. And then in here, you see we've got our CRUD functionality. So get snippets, get a snippet by ID, create a snippet, update a snippet, delete a snippet, and then we export all of those so that we could reference them outside of this file. Hopefully that makes sense for there. And I just want to say, I want to show you a little bit of Fauna JavaScript npm maybe. For this library, there's the FaunaDB package. This is already installed or already part of our dependencies and installed if you ran your install. And if we scroll down, this gets maybe a little interesting on how you use this. And I would say it takes a bit of practice to see how to use this FaunaDB client, but we'll see that here in a second. So you have these, the client that you perform a query with, and then you tell it what type of query. So you can create, if you create, you tell it what collection, and you tell it what data, for example. Now, the interesting thing with Fauna is that there's no unique URL for a specific database, there's really just a unique key of how you interact with that database. So the key that we referenced is going to be the thing that goes specifically to our database, and then lets us reference a specific collection in here. So anyway, just wanted to show you, you can go through and look more at their documentation, but we're just going to kind of dive right in here. So let's start with the get snippets, the first one here. And what we want to do, well, actually, sorry, let's go back up one step and just show you how we initialize all this stuff. So we require the Faunadb package, we get that here, and then we create a client. Now, if you've seen this with any other, with Trello or with Twitter or with Sanity or any other data source of some sort, you use your Faunadb thingy or your the thing you import, and then you create a client passing in some sort of secret. In this case, it's referencing that environment variable fauna secret. That thing is inside of .env.local. So Nextjs will pick up on this automatically. The one thing we actually do need to do is, since we changed our environment variables, we need to restart our application. So you would do just kill the one that you had running. You'll see it's loading in environment variables here, and then restart it to have it take those into account. So in addition to the Fauna client, then we have this little query object. So this will be off of Faunadb. We get this query object, and just for a shorthand, we can kind of call that Q. So what we want to do is start by using our Fauna client and then calling the query. And then inside of here, we want to do a couple of things. So we want to get all of the records inside of the collections of, or the collection snippets. So remember, we gave our collection a name of snippets. So I'm going to work backwards here a little bit. I'm going to call q.collection and then type in snippets. And so from this collection, we want to get all of the documents. So then let's go back one more, document. So let's surround q.collection with documents here. And then for each one of those documents, we want to paginate on that document. And the reason is, by default, this will just kind of send us back references. We actually want to get the values or the information associated with that record itself, not just the reference to a record. So in this case, we'll call paginate. And this means we want to go over kind of each one of these references. Okay, so we call our paginate, which says out of each document that you got from this collection, we want to paginate over it. And then this is kind of tricky here. Around that, we call a q.map. So q.map will take two things. It will take, how do you iterate through this, or what are you iterating over? So that is our paginate. So paginate gives us each individual reference. And then for each reference, what do we want to do with this thing? Well, we want to run a Lambda function, and then we want to get each item and refer to it as ref in this case, and then call q.get and then q.var ref. So what we're saying here, this is pretty tricky, I think, especially from the beginning. What we're saying here is we basically want to run a map. So if you think about array.map, and this would be, anyway, array.map, inside of here, you get a reference to each item, for example, and then inside of your function, you do something with that item. This is the same exact thing. We're doing a q.map, so we're saying we want to map. Then we're saying, what are we mapping over? Well, we want to get each record or each reference out of the, we want to get each document out of the snippets collection, and we want to iterate over those. And then what do we want to do with each item? Well, we're going to call it ref. So just as if we did this, and then we want to get the data associated with that reference. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's get rid of this boilerplate code here, and let's get rid of the to do. And I think we're missing one closing parentheses here. So we're doing our query. We're going to do a map. We're going to paginate. We're going to iterate through each document in this collection. And then for each one, we want to get the actual data associated with that reference. And then at the end of this, what we want to do is we want to get the data property from this thing. And we want to make sure we await it, async await. And then we want to return data, but we want to format this a bit. So what we're going to do is take that data, and we're going to actually do a regular array map. So in this case, we're going to do data.map. And then for each snippet, what do we want to do? I want to add an ID property to the snippet, and it comes from snippet.ref.id. Now, the reason is this stuff doesn't translate very well over JSON. So you get kind of a weird structure to get to this ID property. So we're just going to grab that ID property from the ref, and then we're going to delete the snippet.ref, and then we'll return the snippet. So now that we've added the ID property and removed the ref, now it's going to be formatted correctly and we can return snippets. Okay. So that was maybe a lot, but it's just kind of how you work with Faunadb. But it actually, once you get the hang of it and you've done it a couple of times, it makes a lot of sense. So I think what we should do is go ahead and switch over to our index page, and let's go ahead and set up SWR to query that stuff. Actually, the last thing before, or the last thing before we do that is inside of our pages API folder, we want to update the snippets file here to make sure we're actually pulling in those snippets from that utils, from Fauna, using that utils function. So we're already importing this utils function up here. We're making sure that this has to be a GET request, and then we'll go ahead and use it. So we'll say snippets equals await get snippets. All right, so that's the function that we just defined. And then we'll return res.status of 200 and then .json of our snippets. So this is going to return back our snippets as JSON. And we already have error handling in here. So if there's an error, we'll log it out, and then we'll return a status of 500 with some sort of generic message in this case. So that should be ready to go. The next thing we want to do is set up SWR inside of our Nextjs application. So if you want some extra reading on SWR, you can go and kind of look at the GitHub repository and get into some of the documentation. But this is from Vercel, the creator of Nextjs, and this is a React hooks library for remote data fetching. So if we were to fetch this data ourselves, we would have to write a fetch request. We would have to maintain some sort of loading state. We'd have to track errors, display errors, that sort of stuff. This will take care of all of that stuff for us by having some really fancy hooks, in addition to being able to do caching and cache invalidation and extra stuff. So you'll see this is really common with Nextjs applications, is to use SWR. So I figured it'd be a great idea to go ahead and tie this in now. So this package, like I said, is already added to our repository. It's already a dependency, and we're already importing this hook. So we're starting out by just setting snippets to an empty array. Well, that's what we want to update. So what happens is we're going to call use SWR, and we're going to tell it where we want it to query. So API/snippets. And this thing is kind of automatically ready then to make a GET request and get that data back. And what it gives us back is a property called data. So use SWR, just doing this part, will set it up to do the query for us. It will return the information as data, and then we can do a little trick here to rename this as snippets. So now this is saying that use SWR will take care of getting the snippets for us, and then we'll have access to it in the snippets variable. If you look also, if you scroll down, we're referencing these snippets and then iterating through it and displaying each one of these snippets accordingly. So let's save this and let's see what we get. Hopefully, if we refresh, we get a mutate in here. We'll go ahead and import this for the time being. We'll talk about this later. Mutate is basically a way to tell it to go and refetch. So we'll import it so we're not missing it, and then we'll reference this later on. So we're able to see our new console log out hello world. We can show the code, we can copy this, and then if I go to paste, you can see that that actually copied appropriately, which is really neat. Go and check out the source code on how that works. I thought this was really cool. And so there's our code. There is our language, there is our description, there's our title, and then we have our edit and delete buttons, which in this case still are not going to do anything. Actually, the edit, the edit would take us to the form, but it's not going to be able to find it, so we'll have to update that. But we're at least able to display stuff, which is really nice. So what we should probably do is now add the functionality to create a snippet. So we'll go back to our Fauna utils file, and then we will go and create or update this create snippet file to see how to create a snippet inside of Fauna. All right, so this thing is taking in all the parameters that we need, the code, language, description, and name. And now we want to use our Fauna client again. And typically this starts with a query. And then you first kind of tell it what overall you want to do. So in this case, we want to create. So we want to create a record in the collection of snippets. Now, again, remember, we're talking about a database, so we need to specify which collection we're going to add this record to. So this becomes q.collection again, and then snippets is the collection. And if you look, this is the same kind of reference as we did up here. So we reference this collection. Now we're referencing again, and then create will take in after the q.collection. After this one, it will take in an object that has a property called data. And then that data object will now add the values of the things that we care about. And those are already here as parameters. So we'll do code, language, description, and name. So this will perform a query in Fauna that will create a record that's inside of the collection snippets with this information as the data field. And so the last thing we want to do is just return whatever that thing returns. So we'll just await for it to finish and then return that directly. So now with this function in place, we'll want to update our create snippet endpoint to be able to go ahead and create that snippet. So we will call our create snippet function, the one we just created, and we've already imported this up here. And we need to pass in all of those values. So code, language, description, and name. And make sure that we're doing these in the right order. It's slightly different than how, actually it's the same order we imported here. And then we're passing them in to this create snippet function. And it takes them in that same order: code, language, description, and name. So we'll wait for that to finish. We'll get a reference to the created snippet by awaiting what that thing returns, and that will be a const. So we have a reference to that thing, and then we'll just return it. So return res.status 200, and then I will return back a JSONified version of this created snippet. Return just like that. And this should actually reference created snippet like that. So now that this endpoint is in place, we can now go into our form and update its ability to create a function or create a snippet. So let's go into our snippet form. And the first thing we want to do is we need to create our React hook form, or configure our React hook form. Now, the reason I went for this package just looking for a package to help with maintaining form state, is it's really tedious to do form state on your own. You have to maintain your state for each property. You have to then update a function on how to update that property and so on. And it just gets really tedious. And I tried out React hook form for the first time, and it's really, really nice. So this is what we want to use here. So in this, we will call our use form hook, and we don't really have to pass it anything. And so this is imported here from React hook form. And then what we want to get back from this thing is a couple of properties. So it returns an object that has a couple of properties: a register function, a handle submit function, an errors object, and then a reset function. And actually, I don't think we're going to end up using reset, but if we wanted to reset our form, we would use that there. So with this stuff in place, what we need to do is tell for each one of our inputs, we want to basically register it with the use form. So I'm going to go and grab this little snippet here so I can paste it in each time. But for each one of our inputs, we want to do that registration, and we can do some validation or define some validation on it. So our first input here is name, and we can add this ref equals, and then we call register, and we pass it some validation stuff, which in this case, we're just saying this should be required. So this is going to be the same on each one of our inputs. So we'll have that first name input, and then we'll have our select. So this is for the language. And then we'll have our description. So this is a text area. We'll add the register there. And lastly, we'll have our code down there. All right, so let's actually move over to create a snippet. This should take us to the form, and we see the stuff here. Save and cancel aren't going to do anything, so let's go ahead and update those. So the one thing that we now need to do is we are deciding whether or not to use the onSubmit function handlers as updating or creating. The reason we have this is we're going to be able to pass a snippet to this form. So if this form has a snippet, it's basically going to be in edit or update mode. If it doesn't get past a snippet, which in this case it does not, it's going to be in kind of create snippet form. So the only thing we need to do is surround this. So whichever function gets used, we want to surround it with handle submit. So this is in the starter documentation inside of React hook form. So whatever function you define as your callback, just surround that thing with handle submit. And handle submit will end up passing you the data for that React hook form has been keeping track of. So I'm going to comment out this push here on the router, and let's just log out the data to see if this is actually keeping track of stuff. And you'll see hopefully how useful this library is. So let's go over to the console and let's just add in some dummy data here, and we'll save. And now you see it's getting us all this information. Now, the other thing it will do is it won't let you do save if any of the validation fails. So remember, we made all of these required, and some of that stuff is failing, or this one specifically is failing. So the other thing that we can do is we can add errors in here as well. Now I'm going to kind of go through these and just kind of paste them in pretty quickly. But for each one of these, below the input, we can check if there is on the errors object, if it has a name property, then we want to display that name error. And in this case, we can just say name is required because we know that's the only type of error that it can throw. So we'll do this for each one. We'll do this for our select, and our select is the language. And then we'll do the same thing for the description and the code. And you could take this and you could do more types of validation, but at least in this case, you can see that it's going to show us all the things, all the errors that we have. So now it's going to make sure all these are filled in, and then we can now click save and we see our data, which is actually really nice. So let's go back up to our create snippet function. And we basically just want to make a fetch request to our API endpoint for creating it. So we've got the data that we need here. We've got the individual properties that we need. And after this, we will push on the router to go back to the home page, but we will do a fetch request. And this is going to be API/create snippet. Remember that file over here. Nextjs automatically kind of registered that as an API endpoint for us. And then we want to pass some configuration to fetch. So this will be a post method. We'll have a body of JSON stringify, and we'll pass in an object that has code, language, description, and name properties. So those are all the ones that we just said that we needed. And then we'll have a headers property, and we'll add a content type and make sure that Nextjs can know that we are passing it JSON in our body. So that looks right. Let's save this, and I'm going to paste out a try catch snippet and move this over here. And then I'm going to copy it so we can create a new snippet here. So let's go back to our form, and we'll say this is a try catch. It's JavaScript, try catch with logging of error. And then we'll paste this in, and let's see what happens. So let's look at our network tab, and let's do a save. And this should send the request off to create snippet. It passed in the right information, and now that snippet has been created, which is really, really cool. And same thing, you can explore kind of looking at the code, copying the code, that sort of stuff. So the next thing we want to do is actually add the edit functionality, which is similar to what we just did. It's going to use that same form, but we're going to have to populate that form with something. So let's come over to our code. Let's go into Fauna utils, and then we'll update, or actually update the update snippet function. So that's what we want to work on here. So we're going to do pretty similar stuff. We're going to start with a Fauna client.query. And then what's the thing that we want to do? Well, we want to update. And then where do we want to update this thing? Well, we need to get a reference to the existing item. So we'll do q.ref. And then inside of here, we tell it which collection we're in. So we've done collection a couple times with snippets in here. And then we'll pass in the ID to tell it, hey, we want to get a reference to the thing that has the ID inside of this collection. And then lastly, we'll pass it the data that we want to update with. So code, language, name, and description again. Save that. And then just like we did before, we will return whatever that thing gives back to us. So we'll await it, and then we'll return that value. And then inside of our update snippet, now we need to update this API endpoint to use that function that we imported already, just as we did with the create. So very similar structure. I hope that you're kind of seeing the parallels here as we go through. And so we just want to call that update snippet and then return whatever it gives back to us. So we'll name that thing updated, we'll await, we will call update snippet, we'll pass in ID, code, language, name, and description, because we need to get the ID here. And then we'll return back a successful message to the user. So res.status of 200, or stats, either way, of 200. And then we'll JSONify the updated record that came back. So that's what we're going to return. And that's all we need to do in there. So you can kind of see how these API endpoints, it's fairly standardized to start going from one to the other once you have the utilities for working with Fauna set up. So now inside of our snippet JS, we want to, inside of this component, we want to add, actually, sorry, that's the wrong one. We want the snippet individual, the component here. And inside of here, it should have, it should be getting past the snippet itself. We've got a little cheat with the delete snippet here is already set up. But if we scroll down, there's there's an edit and a delete. So this edit will send a request to the page edit / and then the snippet ID. So the way this works is inside of pages, if you have a folder, so in this case, edit, that's going to then put this file, the ID file, at /edit or /API /edit, and then this thing. And what this syntax is inside of these brackets is basically saying that we want to get a reference to whatever that route parameter is. So /edit / and then now we want to get access to that individual ID that's in there. So if we scroll down, there's the idea of get server-side props in this case. And in Nextjs, get server-side props will basically, before it renders a page, before it returns a page, it will go and grab some information or do whatever it needs to do, which is probably grab information. So what we want to do is if you visit this page, we want to try to get the existing record that's in Fauna. So we'll grab the ID from context.params.id. And again, this name of ID comes from the fact that we put it in brackets in the file name. So we grab the ID, and then I'm going to get a little shortcut here. But the thing we're missing is we need to now grab the specific record based on its ID, but we don't have that functionality yet. So back inside of Fauna, now we need this piece right here. So to do this, we're going to grab the snippet, and this is an await, and we do a Fauna client.query. Again, you've seen that many times now. Inside of here, we want to do a get, so q.get, based on a ref that again is inside of a collection of snippets. And then we want to pass it the ID of the record that we're looking for. All right. So we're grabbing this record or this snippet record by saying, hey, we want to get the thing that is at the reference inside the collection with this ID. And then we want to do a little bit of formatting on this, just like we did up above. So I'm going to actually copy this snippet where for this individual thing, I want to add the ID property from the ref. I want to delete the ref property and then return the snippet. So there is that. And then inside of our get server-side props, now we want to actually call that endpoint, or actually call that function that we just defined. So this is already imported. So the cool thing about this is since this code is running on the server before this component actually gets sent to the user, we can reference code that runs on the server, including this get snippet by ID. So we'll just call this thing, we'll say snippet equals get or await get snippet by ID, and we'll pass in that ID that we got from this params object here. And then lastly, we'll pass the snippet into our props, which means it will then come up here. And now that this page is going to pass that snippet into the snippet form, inside of the snippet form, we've almost got all of the logic to now be able to update and or create records. But there's a couple of things we're missing. If there is a snippet that does get passed into here, that means we're in edit mode, and we want to have default values for those values that we have on our form. So the way we can do this is inside of our use form, we can pass an object that has a default values property. And then inside of here, we can say, hey, if there is a snippet, set the code to be snippet.data.code. If there is a snippet, set language to be that and description and name. Otherwise, set them to empty strings, which is what we would have had anyway. So this is really neat. Now we're able to reuse this same component to be able to do different logic in here. So the other thing we'll do is we have our create snippet function here. Now we need our update snippet function. And that's not updarty snippet. So now we can update this thing. So it's going to look very similar to what we had above. We'll do a fetch request, and we'll fetch at API/update snippet. And then we'll pass in, this is going to be the method of put. We will have body, JSON stringify, and then we'll pass in our code, language, description, name, and ID. And then lastly, we'll do the same headers to make sure that it knows we're going to send JSON as our data. All right, and then this thing should be updated, and it should then push out to go back home. So once it's updated, it will take you back home. So let's scroll down and make sure we've registered all of these, and we've added the error messages. We've added the handle submit. Inside of our snippet, we are now linking to this edit page. So hopefully this will work. So on console log, let's go to edit. This should populate. Looks like it didn't quite catch the language, although it's already selected. All right, but that's okay. So this looks all right. Let's do an updated on this, and let's save it. And it says language is required. I wonder why that's not picking up by default. Okay, let's save. And now you see it's not spelled correctly, but the thing actually was updated correctly, which is really cool. So we have the ability to read them all. We have the ability to create and update. Now we need the ability to delete. So let's go back over to our utils in Fauna here. And now we want to delete a record. And you can probably imagine by this point, after doing so many of these, what this is going to look like. But I will go ahead and type it out. So fauna client.query. And then we want to do a delete. So q.delete. We need to get a ref to something that's in the collection of snippets. And then pass in the ID. And that should be it. So there is our delete functionality. Now let's look at our delete snippet endpoint. And here we're going to call that delete snippet function. So const deleted. And we call our delete snippet, passing in the ID. So we get that from the body there. And then we return our res.status of 200 and then JSONify that deleted record. All right, and we'll save that. And then back in snippet, this code was already here because I forgot to remove it, but that's okay. We're making that fetch request, a delete request, passing in the ID, making sure we're passing it in as JSON. And then if that works, then we call a snippet deleted function, which is passed in from index. And all we're doing there is when that thing is deleted, we're calling mutate. And basically this tells SWR to go and re-query the information, which will refresh our data. So let's see if this works. We should be able to delete this, and then it will refresh our page. You see the delete snippet made the actual request, delete request with the ID. That thing is deleted. Now we have this one. We still can show code and copy code. We could edit it if we want to. We have full CRUD capabilities inside of here, which I think is really nice. So that was a lot. That was, to me, a lot of fun to build. I'm really happy with the way that the demo worked out. I'm curious what you think of it, if you enjoyed it. Hopefully you did. I'm also really curious. Let me know if you'd like to see a part 2 to this where we add authentication with Auth0 and maybe add a couple of extra features of maybe querying by language, for example, or something like that. Let me know if you think that would be fun in the comments below. So keep an eye out for that, but hopefully you enjoyed it. This Next.js crash course. I love Next.js. I'm super happy with it. Hopefully you enjoyed it, as I already said. Anyway, thanks for checking out the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.